speak, and this is for Department 14, Clark County District Court. Let's start with right over here, I guess. Yes, please.
Introductions.
Want to intro? Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Let the candidates go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Okay.
You got mic.
Thank you.
And speak close to it.
All right. First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Adriana Escobar, and I was just appointed by the governor as the person who's going to take Department 14 after Judge Mosley. The judge is going to serve there, and that's quite a hard act to follow, I think. So I'm very excited and very honored. I grew up in Las Vegas, studied here my entire life, and attended UNLV. After UNLV, I became a certified substance abuse counselor and worked with a lot of different clients who had substance abuse problems that were also veterans, so I understand those issues. I passed the California and Nevada bars. I prosecuted for a while. I've also started my law firm, worked in civil law. I've been on the Public Utilities Commissioner, smart meters, and Taxi Cab Authority, and the Nevada Consumer Advocate for the state. I'm also the chairman for Spring Valley Hospital, and I've worked a lot in our community. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you. My name is Mike Davidson, and I have lived here for about 34 years now. Started my practice here. I've heard my partner Stu Bell's name mentioned. We've been partners since the late 70s. We were in practice together in private practice for about 20 years, and then he asked me to come over and help him in the district attorney's office, and I served as your assistant district attorney for about 5 years. I ran the entire civil division of that office. I ran the family division of that office. I did death penalty assessments and other things in that office. Following that, the city of North Las Vegas asked me to come over and help them to build their prosecution office. I did that for 5.5 years. I also served as one of the first and one of the original Supreme Court settlement conference judges. And I've been active in the state bar, on the Board of Governors, and in various areas in this community, serving in leadership roles in many cultural and civic functions. And I appreciate the time that you're spending to allow us to appear in front of you this afternoon.
Thank you. Michael, you want to start with the questioning?
Sure. Okay, it's working. This question is for both of you panelists. I'll start with you, Mr. Davidson, same question. Please describe one instance in which you faced an ethical dilemma and how you resolved it. You can choose your own ethical dilemma, but if you have the intestinal fortitude and candor today, I'd like you to comment on the influence of prominent attorneys, wealthy benefactors, or other special interests that, although it's never talked about or put into paper, I know it's there. I'd like you to, again, you can choose your own ethical dilemma, but I'd like to know one instance in which you faced an ethical dilemma and what you did to resolve it, specifically, again, prominent attorneys, their influences, wealthy benefactors, or special interests.
There are probably none of us who have lived in this community for a long time who cannot say that they have not met an awful lot of people. If you serve as a judge in this community, the odds are that you are going to have attorneys appear in front of you who you have tried cases with, who you know, who are friends of yours, people who have contributed to your campaigns. I've had that situation come up. And a judge first has to ask himself or herself the question, can I decide this case fairly? Do I feel that I will be improperly influenced by the fact that this individual or this company has contributed money to my campaign, or because I know this person? That's an easy question, because if you say yes and you're honest about it, then you have an absolute obligation to recuse yourself. The more difficult ones are where you recognize that somebody in the community might look at the situation, and we've got some of those in the newspaper today, where you have to say, I have to disclose and let them know what's going on, because you have an obligation to hear cases as well.
Thank you.
And so you make your disclosures.
Try to keep ear open for that weird sounding thing right there. That'll give you guys a cue.
It's stampeding elephant.
All right.
It cuts through some,
Did you
so
want
it's
to
better than
follow
me.
up?
No, well, for Ms. Escobar, to allow her to answer, I'd just like
Okay.
to say, Mr. Davidson brought up, and I'm glad you did, you know, again, choose your own ethical dilemma or the one I think, but what I've noticed in the paper we've seen recently with Phil Ivey and of course, Mr. Mayweather, is we are getting, in other cases, where judges should, based on appearances, recuse themselves, and they are not. But again, choose your own ethical dilemma, tell me how you resolved it.
Well, when I sat as a Public Utilities Commissioner, it's an administrative law position, I had a very good screening, and I rarely met with the lawyers because in that case I really wasn't supposed to, but I was supposed to give equal time to the parties. And so I always had an attorney present, the one that worked with me, and there was one time that a party got through my screening process without my being aware, actually was trying very vehemently, in an indirect way, but very direct way, to ask me to possibly talk about a case and that was active and move forward in their direction, and that was absolutely inappropriate and would never happen. And I will follow the law and be fair and just and reasonable, no matter who it is. It's our duty to do so. So, and I knew there could be consequences with the future of my job in that, and it was what it was. I did what I needed to do.
Okay, thank you. Douglas?
Good afternoon. My question is this. Every 2 years, the RJ comes out with a poll, right? Judge the judges? Okay, my question is, what do you each think of that, and how will that gauge? I take that back. Is it subjective, or is it accurate?
I've been here a long time, and one of the things that is always a challenge is trying to educate people when they have to go and make election choices for judges. I think that poll has been probably the single most valuable tool that's out there for people to be able to make judgments about judges. My experience with it has been that if you eliminate the comments on either end of the spectrum, because there will always be people who have axes to grind, and if they didn't do well in front of a judge, they're going to be unhappy. But by and large, and I've appeared in front of every judge in this state for the last 35 years, by and large, I find that they're pretty accurate. If you take the middle comments, if you take the evaluations, my experience is that they are a true and accurate reflection of how that judge has performed on the bench, because ultimately it's the lawyers who appear in front of those judges every day who know best whether that judge is courteous, knowledgeable, prepared, unbiased, and so I think that's been a terrific tool.
With respect to the Review Journal, I think it's a very good tool. I welcome the ability to critique our judges as an attorney that's practiced for a long time, and as a person who's taking the bench. I want to get feedback, and I want to know what people think I'm doing well and not so well at the beginning, and for the duration of my career. I think transparency is very good, and I can only learn from it, and I'm talking from a personal perspective, and I invite it. I think it's very good. Thank you.
Okay. Travis?
You caught me napping. Ms. Escobar, what's your role in as a deputy attorney general right now?
At the moment, I prosecute securities litigation and mortgage fraud, and these cases are pretty complex. You know, I've seen just terrible things with people defrauding a lot of different people. They're taking their life savings, and you know, it's been very busy, and I think it's very, very important. And you have to be very thoughtful in these cases as well. You have to make sure that the elements are there, and understand how the system works. And I've put a lot of time into preparing for the grand juries. And because I prepare for the grand juries like I'm going to court, I find that a lot of times the defendant, with his attorney afterwards, decides that they're not interested in going to court necessarily. But I take it very seriously. It's a very important role.
Well, let me follow up. You've been endorsed by some very, very powerful influences in the valley here. What kind of assurances can you give us that you're not just going to flip for the prosecution?
Got 15 seconds.
Okay, I assure you, because I have worked with people that have been convicted of felonies and misdemeanors as a counselor in my life. And I was also offered a job by the public defender's office the same week as the one from the prosecutorial agency, the same week out of law school. And in my life, I've thought that that's a tremendous compliment. So I'm a very fair and balanced person, and I won't approach it from that way. In fact, I'll be very careful about things, because I think it's critical. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a
Dr.
question for-
Hawkins?
Mike, too?
I'll use mine.
Oh, okay.
I'll share.
Nevada has consistently shot down the notion of an intermediate appellate court in various levels of flames. One thing that I know, my practice is primarily bankruptcy. We've got these bankruptcy appellate panels with basically use out-of-state bankruptcy judges. Would it make sense for Clark and Washoe County probably as well to hear some of the appeals with 3-judge panels of district court judges functioning effectively as an intermediate appellate court and lightening the load on the Supreme Court?
Now you this way. Why don't you go?
I have thought for a long time that this community would benefit from having an intermediate appellate court. I think it would give the Supreme Court time to spend more time deliberating the really important cases that go to that court. Whether or not we can constitutionally, delegate district court judges to serve as an intermediate appellate court, I'd have to give some additional thought to. I'm not sure that constitutionally we can do that. But I have always spoken out in favor of an intermediate appellate court. I think it would benefit the practice in this community. I think it would benefit the litigants, and it would benefit the Supreme Court.
My observation is similar. I have observed and also spoken with a few of the justices, even recently, and I believe that with an appellate court, an intermediate appellate court, that would give the justices much more time to work on other cases, and I think at some point, I hope that that's something that we see that comes to fruition. I think it's really important.
As far as the specifics, we're not getting one in the near future. What would you think about district court judges as part of the district court hearing an appeal?
Right. Well, I'll be honest, I haven't studied it from the district court perspective, and I'm not certain what qualifications exist and what requirements exist. But I can get back to you on that, but I really don't know.
I mean, Dr. Hawkins, I can tell you that constitutionally I think there's a problem. Simply because district court judges, as Judge Mosley can tell you, do not have jurisdiction to sit as appellate judges for other district court judges. And I don't know that you can, with the stroke of a pen, create that kind of jurisdiction in district court judges.
Okay, Wayne, you ready?
Okay.
Pertaining to the veterans in court, what would you, as judge, want to accomplish for the vets that would appear in your court? For instance, we know that you have to follow the law, but sometimes there are certain mitigating factors for vets that constitute that the law should not be always to the letter because situations happen with the veterans.
Similar to drug court.
Okay.
It's a good analogy. So the question is, without violating equal protection, what accommodations can you make for veterans similar to drug court, for example?
Well, I've worked with veterans as a counselor after they've been in certain situations, they're on parole and probation for substance abuse problems. So I understand that they have a very delicate and unique situation, and they've served our country. And I do think that we should put a plaque on the court. And since they mentioned that, it's something I would like to do right away. And I'd like the marshal to ask. But I also think that if I don't have the answer, I should ask the question and follow the law. And I have no problem doing that. I think we should. It's, something that we need to know. And we need to look at the circumstances that the veterans have. Not only substance abuse problems, but there are anger management problems and post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I believe that that's something that we need to really care for and address. We have to follow the law, but you have to look at each situation. There is some discretion, and I believe very much that it's something that we should be informed of and try to help with.
Same question? I remember when the Vietnam veterans came back. I remember what many people in this country did to disrespect their service. I hope we never get to that point again. Everybody who stands before a judge, either in a civil case or in a criminal case, brings a unique set of circumstances and facts before the court. I don't think it takes a real stretch for a judge to be able to say, I recognize that you've been through some things that other people might not have been through that may explain who you are today and what led you to be in front of this court today. You don't have to stretch the rules to do that, because every judge is invested with discretion. You have to follow the rules, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that veterans get a free pass. They don't. But they present special circumstances that any court should consider.
Thank you. Major Price?
I think we have time for 2 more questions before they...
Okay. Major?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Davidson. First question for you is, have you been to the holding cells at the Clark County Detention Center lately and seen the filthy and inhumane conditions under which inmates are being held? And what say you on the local implementation of a prisons for profit system where inmates are held at minimum for 12 hours, so the state or county, whether the person's bailed out immediately or released on their own recognizance, they're held for a minimum of 12 hours so that the state or the county, whichever it is, can get the $200 to $300 per day in the federal taxpayer inmate housing allowance?
I've probably spent more time in the different jails in this community than anybody in this room, because the first 20 years of my practice I did criminal defense. I've been on both sides. I've been a prosecutor and I've been a criminal defense attorney. I do criminal defense now. I can remember several occasions where our jails have been either under consent decrees, which, as you know, are supervision of federal judges, or on the verge of going on consent decrees, because conditions were deplorable, because inmates were not getting the medical treatment that they needed, appropriate treatment. I will always be leery of any system that puts somebody who's going to earn a profit in charge of prisons. I know what Corrections of America has done around the country. I've read the reports. I've seen what happens. I think it's a dangerous circumstance, because prisons serve in the role of having to safeguard the people that are placed in their care. I don't trust the for-profit model to do that.
And before I just wanted to also clarify that when I was referring to the CCDU, I was not necessarily referring to the inmate where they're sent to stay for 30 or 60 days, because I have no personal experience with that, but I do have experience with the, what is it called, the holding cells. Where there's like capacity for 6 or 8 people and they throw 40 people in there
Were
for
they like
5
cots
days.
right next to each
There's
other?
no cots. No, it's a hard concrete dirty floor that 40 or 50 people are shoved into this cell. They're not allowed to brush their teeth, they're not allowed to take a shower, and they're sat there for days on end, even though they've been bailed out or released on their own recognizance. Yeah, that's my question. I would like Escobar to answer, if you will.
We've got
Cer-
about 40
certainly.
seconds left.
Oh, okay. Well, I feel much more comfortable with the state and people who are working in the correctional system and have to go through all of the different vetting processes and have responsibilities running the correctional institutions, because I have much more confidence in that than in a private agency, frankly. And how do I feel about the inmates? The situation that you've described, it sounds very difficult and very bad, and I'm not sure as a judge really how I could affect that, except for trying to move it along really as quickly as possible, from a practical perspective. I am going to have a civil docket at first, but at some point in the future it will probably be criminal.
Can I tell you how you fix that as a judge? We did it in North Las Vegas when we had problems. Judges have the power to issue what are called depop orders, depopulation orders, where you can order that certain inmates be released. You can look and you can see that you've got people in there for certain minor offenses and order that they be released after they've served a lesser time. So that's the way we did it in North Las Vegas when we had to clear up that problem.
Can I just take like 15 more seconds? I just wanted to clarify that, just for the record, on 23 March last year, I was picked up and arrested by Metro on a false, with this computer system that we're talking about. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's...
Veteran place.
Yeah, and then it generated a faulty warrant in the system for my arrest. I've never had any run-ins with the law, and I'm an exemplary 21-year combat veteran, highly decorated, model citizen, volunteer in the community, picked up, thrown into the jail, into the holding cell, and kept for 29 hours. Being 25 hours being after the judge looked into the system and realized the error and ordered my immediate release on my own recognizance. I was held for another 25 hours in filthy conditions. When I asked to speak to the court officials at the CCDU to clarify the error and bring it to their attention, I was thrown in what's that called? Solitary confinement for 6 hours. I was let out of solitary confinement 5 minutes after the court officials went home for the day. That's what I'm referring to. And I realize that you guys probably agree with me that there shouldn't be a persons for profit system, but unfortunately, regardless of what civil service capacity that the inmate staff hold, that they're all working for either Metro or in some fashion security guards or whatever, they are still being, it's a culture thing within the system that tells the staff, don't let anybody go. Even in a case like mine, where they made an error, let me go immediately. Nope, got to keep her for at least 12 hours so we can get that money. And that's what it's about.
Hey Travis, we got your client.
He's already refused to take me on with that.
Yeah, I think we need to go to the closing.
Okay, one more question. I promised him a question.
My question, Ms. Escobar actually answered without even having to ask because it was carried over from before, but it's going to be basically the same thing as I asked before is number one, are you willing to put the placard outside your courtroom to have defendants identify themselves if they are veterans, let your marshals know what's going on, or, like they said before, make an announcement in your courtroom that if there are any veterans present, to please make themselves notified so they can go ahead and see if they qualify for a vet court program.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're ready for a round of closing remarks. Okay, 1 minute each.
1 minute each.
All right, folks, you'll have 1 minute each to make a closing statement. Whoever would like to go first.
Sure. I was appointed by the governor because I have a tremendous amount of experience. Aside from the vetting, I have 21 years experience, and a lot of that has been hearing very complex cases at the Public Utilities Commission long before the smart meters. These were hundreds of millions of dollars that I had to decide on, and they were very difficult and very detailed cases. I've also been the consumer advocate for the state. I've represented consumers at the legislature and overseen a lot of deceptive trade cases and also utilities cases. My work at the Attorney General's office as Chief Deputy Attorney General and as a prosecutor of these crimes is very important. And I believe that a court should be thoughtful, very hardworking, very diligent, and very respectful to attorneys and defendants and everyone that's there. And I will put the time in, and the heart in, and the mind in to fulfill my role. Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to your friends, talk to your acquaintances who are lawyers, talk to the acquaintances who are judges. Ask them about the candidates. I think you will find that there is nobody, either on this panel or on the previous panel, who has more experience in more different areas in this community than I do. Both in the civil arena and the criminal arena, as a prosecutor, as a defender, as an administrator, having run large offices, having been on the judicial side of things. I have been training for this job for 35 years. This community deserves to have people sitting on the bench who know what they're doing. They know what they're doing because they've been there for a long time. I am a courtroom lawyer and have been for a long time. The only way that you can do this job effectively is to be able to demonstrate mature judgment. That only comes with experience. That's the experience that I bring to this position, and I've enjoyed your support in the past. I hope to have it again. Mike Davidson.
Okay, thank you. I believe that would bring this to a conclusion. Thank you.
Just for a little housekeeping thing, we told the last round of candidates. The new thing with YouTube is you are allowed to tag other YouTubes in your YouTube. So in this YouTube, if you feel like you want to put it on your Facebook page or your website or whichever, you can make any follow-on comments to what you said on your own YouTube video and tag this YouTube video to that. So I just want to let you know that so that you can, so it'll help you market your campaign. Thanks.
Well, let's give them another round of applause, huh? That's all, right?